Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with.
Tomas Härenstam, co-founder of Free League Publishing and lead designer of the Dragonbane RPG.
Thank you for coming back again to talk to us about another one of your great works from Free League Publishing. And today we're going to talk about Dragonbane, Path of Glory, which I am very excited to talk about because I love the core rulebook, I love the bestiary, and now we have a full campaign adventure that we can introduce the world of Dragonbane to our players. But this is not a new game. From what I understand, this was a set of 3 adventures that came out in Sweden between 1985 and 1986, almost 40 years ago. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. This was probably the first campaign in the sense of several interconnected adventures that were released for the game Dragonbane, or Dragonbane as it was called in Sweden, or still is. It was 3 fairly thin black and white booklets, the way the adventures looked back then. And they made quite an impact, especially the first part, The Dead Forest, was kind of a classic. It still is a classic. And second and third parts also. But I think together, this campaign, Path of Glory, was kind of the first interconnected, longer story arc that was ever published for the game. So it definitely has a kind of an iconic status still. And it's been really fun to awaken that campaign again. And we're working with the original author who wrote, well, actually the 2 first parts of the old campaign. So he's been on board working with us to in this new edition. And of course, we have reworked a lot of things, upgraded it to the new rule set. It's got new art, new maps, new layout, new everything. And so it's not like an old adventure straight out of the 80s, but even though it has its origins there and like the main characters and locations and things like that, it's still the same, but the adventure is very much a modern creation.
For those hearing about Path of Glory for the first time, what is the adventure about? Why is it so iconic?
Right, I think it's especially the first part is also a very sandboxy, which is kind of, I mean, it was a bit of a new thing for the game back then, and it still holds up well, I think, in the sense of the Dead Forest is really just an area to explore with exciting characters and locations, and there are like meta plots going through it, but you're very free as a player to explore it the way you want, which is and it has very, kind of a fairy tale sense to it, very iconic characters, and then of course without going into spoiler territory, of course the kind of the story builds and the epicness grows as we go into the second and third parts of the campaign.
And for anyone that's familiar with the original adventures, I believe they're called The Dead Forest, Gates of Power, and Heart of Darkness. If they look at this now, obviously besides the artwork, is there any differences? Was anything updated?
Yeah, there's a lot of big and small updates, really. Like you mentioned there, the art and the layout and graphic design maps, all of that is completely new, even though it's inspired by, I mean, we kind of use the old art as inspiration, but the art is all new. But also in terms of content, we've tried to, the original trilogy was fairly loose in the sense of the 3 parts, maybe, because they were written and released separately, one at a time. And I guess there's some lack of cohesion maybe between the 3 parts. So we try to kind of build them closer to kind of fit better together. That is one thing. And another thing that we did, which is kind of fun, is that Roger Undhagen, who wrote the first 2 parts and was intended to write the 3rd part as well of the original version, he never got around to do that for a variety of reasons. He was unable to finish the campaign, so another writer did that. So the original part 3, Heart of Darkness, was written by another author, and he did a fine job, but it was not really Roger's vision. So he's kind of, that has always been the case, that what would have been the original third part that was never actually done. So now he's had a chance to create what was his original vision that he never got the chance to realize back then, and he's done that together with us, because of course we kind of work together on this. It's really a team effort.
Mhm. So what I'm enjoying about Dragonbane is that there's so much of the world that feels unexplored. Um, does this setting help uh, flesh out certain parts of the world?
It does, yeah. I mean, we always intended to kind of have an implied setting, not like a world map in the core game, but rather kind of just a much. There is a map, and there is a small portion of the world in the core game called the Misty Vale, which is a relatively like 100 miles across area or something like that. But of course, there's a lot of history to that small area that says something about the bigger world as well. So there is a lot of implied setting, but we didn't want to overwhelm players with a whole continent or countries and all of that in the core game. So we're kind of building it slowly and adding new areas, but still without giving that world map, because we feel that in a game like this, if you get a world map, no character in this world would have a world map, or hardly anyone. So it kind of takes away some of the mystery if it gets too kind of technical and you get to see what's out there. It's more interesting to keep that kind of a little bit unknown. But Path of Glory does add more areas. Of course, there is the Dead Forest, which is another area of around roughly the same size as the Misty Vale. And then there are other even larger regions described in parts 2 and 3. I won't go into those just now because of spoilers. But yeah, so you will learn more of the world, see more of the world through this campaign.
Mm. So let's talk a little bit about the story. Obviously, we can't be too spoilery, especially for those who are looking, especially for anyone looking at this for the first time. But what is the main story behind this? Who's the big antagonists in the
Yeah.
story?
It's an interesting thing in a sense. There is, and that's not much of a spoiler because it's kind of the first thing you get to know, is that the Dead Forest is a cursed forest, and the curse is kind of the spreading. You kind of have to try to find out why this is happening. That's kind of the hook of it all. And there are like, there are like three main powers competing, and then you will actually learn about that as you play. You won't really know that from the get-go who those three powers are. So and that was the case also in the original trilogy, which was kind of interesting. That yes, there are definitely good and bad, but you have three competing factions, and they're actually none of them are purely good. They all have their agendas. Some of them are a bit more bad than others, but really you have three separate competing factions that are kind of fighting to find, well, power, but also a certain artifact, and then the player characters kind of get drawn into this. So I won't go into exactly who will be kind of the main antagonist. There will be one, but that's something you'll actually, I think, it's better to learn as you play, because that's not revealed right at the start of the adventures. It's probably better to kind of discover that when playing.
Mm. So it looks like you have the same art team that worked on the bestiary. Um, is what did they have any particular challenges or moments of I guess of interest, you could say, when they did this? I noticed that this also has a double-sided map.
Yeah, right. I mean, the maps are really cool in themselves. I mean, the separate big maps that you mentioned there, the double-sided one. It's one side is going to be the Dead Forest, and then the other side is the area that you'll discover in the third adventure, which is an even larger area. And those are both done by Francesca Barrield, who's an Italian map artist who did the big map in the core game. So that's going to have the same kind of style. As for the art in the books, yes, Johan Egerkrans who did the most of the art in the rule book and the cover for the core game, also does the cover for this one, like those two minotaurs that are on the cover there. those are kind of classic characters from the original Adventure of the Dead Forest. They're really mean Minotaur brothers who you can encounter. It usually ends badly. They actually never had art in the original campaign. There was never a picture of them in the original adventure. So it was kind of fun to actually create this art of them and then put them on the cover of the book as well. That was kind of fun, I think. So yeah, I mean, and David Brasgala does most of the interior art. He also did all of the interior art in the bestiary. So it's and I think his art and Johan's style, they work really well together. So they all have this kind of fairy tales feel to the art that I think works well with what we want to do with the game.
Mm. How is the tone of the game? I notice sometimes with older modules, older adventures, they tend to be pretty deadly,
Yeah.
pretty brutal. Would you say the tone's mostly the same with this book or different?
I think so. I mean, it can be fairly brutal. I mean, I think Dragonbane overall does this. It's a kind of a light-hearted fantasy. It's not grimdark. I think you can just tell that from the art. So it's not brutal in the sense that it's extremely bloody or grimdark or depressing. It's the opposite of that. It's actually kind of fun and lighthearted. But it is brutal in the sense that fights can be deadly and quick. So, and that's kind of the furious type, the mirth and mayhem that we're kind of talk about this game, that it has this fun factor but also a brutality that also can be kind of fun, because it keeps combat short and exciting. You're never safe in full. Even if you're a very skilled fighter, you can still get, a lucky goblin with an arrow can still kill you. So it's always going to be, it has that kind of nerve that I guess is kind of old school in a way, but we feel that's still very much a valid design today, because it keeps the game, we think, more interesting than if the player characters are kind of invulnerable to all but the most powerful of foes. We think this is more interesting, that the world is more deadly and more varied, and you're never quite safe.
One of the main things I'm really excited about Dragonbane Path of Glory is that it gives me a window to look into Swedish mythology a little more closely. Now, I think I'm an American, and I think sometimes we make mistakes where we assume that English mythology, Tolkien and all that, is European mythology. It's the same thing, and obviously that's not so. I mean, you all you have to do is look at Swedish metal and other metal in other places, and
Yeah.
yeah, totally very different. I years and years ago, I interviewed Swedish metal bands, and their music is night and day compared to other types of metal music around the world. So if I may ask, so that's why I'm excited about it. I want to see how this adventure feels like through a different lens. So if I may ask, how do you feel that is there a difference? Do you feel between, I guess you would say, a Swedish fantasy adventure than an English fantasy adventure or an American fantasy adventure?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's I guess each country, I mean, it can be, individual differences, but I think you can see some trends in fantasy stories from different countries. I think the US, yeah, I mean, American tradition is kind of, there are some differences even with the UK and the kind of more English, and then Swedish as well. I think generally Swedish fantasy is a bit more influenced, I guess, by folklore. It's a bit more low level. It's not typically not high fantasy. It's kind of, the heroes are not quite as epically powerful, perhaps. I mean, comparing Dragonbane to maybe D&D, it's less of a, like I mentioned, that the characters will remain vulnerable, and they won't be superheroes. They will be still, fairly mortal. So I guess that's a bit of a difference, maybe. Of course, there are American games where this is the case as well. So it's not a, but if you just overall looking at, like, trying to see some differences or trends, I guess that focus on a bit more folklore style adversaries and creatures and things like that, and a bit kind of low fantasy tone, I think, is another one that I would say kind of comes through. Of course, we have another game, Vaesen, which is all about Nordic folklore. So there we go, all the way. I mean, Dragonbane is still kind of your, at its core, a Tolkien-esque style fantasy game. So it is fairly close to D&D in looking overall. But yeah, if you look at kind of the differences, I would say those are the ones.
Does it look like Free League will be republishing older adventures besides Path of Glory?
Yeah, the plan is to kind of, I mean, we want to publish a lot of things for this game, both adventures and other things. We have a magic book in the works. We have the bestiary out already, but in terms of adventures and campaign books and expansions, the idea is to have both completely new material and then imagine and publish new editions of classic old materials for Dragonbane, which this is the 10th or 11th edition of, depending on how you count. So yeah, we do have some plans for some. There are some other kind of the ones now seen as the best of what was done for Dragonbane back in the mid to late 80s, early 90s maybe. We do have plans to make new editions of some of those as well. Not everything, but some of like the top picks. The ones who truly stood the test of time. Those are the ones that we are planning to make new editions of. So that will be happening. But I think the next one after Path of Glory, we have another campaign module in the works, and that is going to be a completely new one. So that's not a new edition of something old. So we want to kind of mix up those things and do about equal amounts of each.
So that's exciting. I can't wait to see more adventures. Sometimes I'll look at Kickstarter and I'll see other people publishing Dragonbane adventures, but it's all in Swedish, and I'm like, oh,
there are some in English too. I think most of them are probably in Swedish, but the third-party license that we have is available both in English and Swedish. And I know there are some Dragonbane stuff out there being kickstarted and published as well using the third-party license that we have, and that's great to see.
Any last words before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I mean, of course, we could mention that Path of Glory is on pre-order right now, and we are working at the moment to finalize it. We just finished the play test internally here a few days ago. The finale of the whole campaign. We played it a couple of days ago, and now we're just polishing things up, and we'll have some further final, tests and checks and doing everything. So in about a month or something like that, I think we should have a finished PDF that everyone who pre-orders will actually get. So they get a chance to look at it and feedback on it as well for a while before we go to print. So it's a good time to check it out now and even get a sneak peek.
One last question. If I was running this adventure, what character would you roll up?
I think I would roll up. I mean, the ducks are always cool. I think I would roll up a duck mage. We had one in the group. He died sadly during the campaign, but he was a memorable character. So I think I would roll up something like that.
When I first saw the Mallards as a playable ancestry, I wasn't too sure in the beginning. I did because Americans are still having nightmares about Howard the Duck, that movie that came out in the 80s. But it's I'm enjoying how they fit into the I guess you could say the ecosystem or the world building. It's not just like plopped in there, right? Everything fits very well together.
They are a bit. They have been throughout this game. They have been around throughout this game's history, and they've always been kind of divisive. Some players just don't want them in their game. Others love them, and very few are indifferent. So it's always been like that, and I guess that'll continue.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about Dragonbane: Path of Glory. I will put all the information for the pre-order or when this comes out on Drive to RPG, anything like that. I'll put that in the description below. Again, thank you, Tomas. And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.